Hello everyone, and welcome back to the RimWorld 1.5 Anomaly DLC series. Today, my friends, we will be accomplishing a personal goal that we've been looking into doing for a little while now, but before we actually begin getting into all that, I want to say that I've added the HD Pawn Textures mod once more into this series simply because I like the way it makes the pawns look, but it is still out of date. It's only up to 1.4, so if you decide to use it, keep that in mind. As you can see here on this comparison I done with Akio, there's actually quite a big difference in how it makes them look. It does not change the textures of weapons or clothing, but even with the pawns with a more HD texture, I feel like it makes everything look better. Now for our first construction project this episode, we're going to be removing the walls between the research room and the library, and thank you to our friend Dazon1602 for reminding me that the library needs to be in the research room to speed up research. I knew that, and I originally had it in there for that purpose, but apparently last episode I just completely forgot. But as you can see now, the two rooms are one, and they are both considered the laboratory, so our research speed should be a little higher. Now then, everyone was still a teeny tiny bit upset about Fernand having a metal horror burst from his chest at the end of last episode, and of course he died, so they were all still a little sad, and I thought some art might cheer them up, and we were going to try to spread this around to everyone's rooms and the dining room, but we were interrupted by a new entity. A strange metallic orb with engravings teleported just outside our base walls. It seems to be quite painful to get close to it. We of course have the option to attack it, although it may have some type of sentience and very well could defend itself. You know us though, we're inclined to go more with the latter option of capturing it and researching it for more information about the void. And of course we'll be sure to suppress its harmful effects as much as possible, chaining it up in its very own containment cell, that way Akio could come in and begin his research. This very well may be one of the strangest entities that we've encountered thus far. A few hours later into the evening, we had an angry ghoul that was coming to rip our heads right off of our shoulders, and of course we didn't like the sounds of that, so we quickly finished it off. Now, we're not going to be feeding this ghoul corpse to our trees. The big goal that I was talking about in the beginning of this video is our ghoul resurrection serum, which we're actually pretty close to completing, so I think I'll keep this one around as well. Of course, we'll raise Van from the dead first, and then maybe this one. Then, after some time, it would appear that Akio has finally learned the purpose of the sphere. This sphere seems to be a weapon of sorts. Its only purpose appears to be to inflict pain on those around it. With time, Akio believes that we may be able to harness this power and or the sphere to use to our advantage, but keep in mind, if this thing is a weapon, someone or something had to have sent it here. But as our research continues, so does the internal drama of our colonist. It looks like Oscar and Wise are now lovers, but Wise was actually in a relationship and had a husband. I had no idea, but apparently I guess she's cheating on him. Then we would finally finish our extensive research into ghoul resurrection serum, meaning that we can finally make it. Or so I thought. It turns out the serum lab actually requires some more bioferrite than we have. But not to worry, friends, because the rat daddy's always got a solution. You see, for quite a while we've actually had bioferrite harvesters unlocked, and so we're going to be building one in each of our entity's containment cells to try and harvest some from them. I'm not going to lie to you, I find it quite poetic, to be honest, that the flesh beasts are what killed Van down in the pit, and yet here we are stealing their life force to try and bring him back, so to speak. Ah, an eye for an eye. Now, that's not to say that these machines didn't come with their own set of issues. They actually very much agitate the entities that they're sucking the bioferrite out of, and thus really pissing them off. Because of that, the Gore Hulk actually needed a shard inhibitor installed in its containment cell to try and make sure that our security was up to snuff. For the time being, I only built 5 of these, one of each for our organic life forms. However, later on you'll see I ended up building one for the sphere as well. Speaking of of which Akio's research has now enabled us to use this as it's intended, as a weapon. Once activated, the sphere will actually teleport to the chosen location, hunt down any enemies there until it's finished and it chooses to return. A little while later into the night, I realized we were actually beginning to have some power problems because of all those harvesters that we hooked up to our SCP entities. So obviously we're going to need to generate some more power. Now we could build more wind turbines or solar panels, but I think a geothermal generator should do the trick. And now I will say, in a few moments you'll see in the video why, but I am extremely glad that we ended up building this when we did, because shit hits the fan pretty quick. In the meantime though, Akio's research has helped us understand more about this unknown sphere. Apparently, when we use it as a weapon, there is a chance that it will attack us as well. I'm very glad we didn't use it before finding this out. Speaking of which, we actually have a raid from the Miasma Slickers, which I think may be the perfect opportunity for us to try out this new weapon. Akio would enter the containment facility and began prepping the sphere. And this spherical metallic monstrosity would waste no time absolutely obliterating the raiders. We didn't know that it had this much power. We could see the massive explosions in the distance, distorting reality itself. The raiders began fleeing the area, what few were left, as many of them were mangled and shredded on the ground. We were very excited to see the work that the sphere had done, until it started teleporting back towards the base, and we had to try and run away before it got to us. Now, I can neither confirm nor deny that it was trying to attack us, but it sure as hell looks like it was at the very least following us. But it eventually returned to the location that we sent it to, and it seemed pretty passive, at least for the time being. Now that its rampage is completed though, I let it sit for a while, and once I was sure that it wasn't going to attack us, I would send Oscar up to retrieve it, and then we would put it back in its holding cell. It is a weapon, so there's a possibility that maybe it functions on some sort of timer. I also wanted to briefly mention during that time as we had that raid, we also had a mech cluster that dropped, though there were no actual mechanoids except for some turrets and a psychic droner, which we'll deal with at a later time. For now though, we have bigger fish to fry. We had something extremely strange that began happening. An unnatural darkness was supposed to begin surrounding our area, but it would appear for the time being that it hasn't happened yet. Something even more strange, Moon went into labor literally right after this happened, almost as if the two events are connected. Moon ended up giving birth to a healthy, beautiful baby shortly thereafter. A beautiful baby girl that was currently going by the name of Cochrane. However, given the events around her birth, I thought Luna might be a much more fitting name. Her birth was foretold by the shroud of darkness that would quickly envelop our colony, and also it is sticking with the theme of her mother's name as well. Because I didn't know how much time we would have before this unnatural darkness enveloped our colony, as mentioned, I would actually begin switching our research over to disruptor flares, but I'm afraid that it wouldn't really matter because the darkness came right after. And it was very, very dark. We couldn't see anything outside of the lights from the base. Inhuman things would move just outside the light. Pillars of jagged, oily metal are falling from the sky. They're terrible to look upon, but surely contain valuable technology. Apparently destroying these pillars could end this unnatural darkness prematurely, or we could try to wait it out. And I do think that we would like to try and give it as much time as possible so that we could try to study it or anything that may come from it. Its effects are already affecting our entities in containment, as our Sight Stealer would immediately try to break out of its cell. Of course, our turret, as well as Jasper, would quickly take care of it. Ah, shit, that's not what I intended at all. Come on, Fugly. Well, apparently now we have the corpse of our very first entity that we had captured. It's a shame, and we did really have some sort of a connection with it, even if it hated us and wanted to eat our face off, so we decided to build it a sarcophagus in the hallways of the containment facility. Even if it felt nothing for us, we felt pity for it, of course. The sarcophagus also had some art on it. The art engraved on the wooden sarcophagus apparently portrays Akio's efforts of trying to study the Sight Stealer. Very fitting, I'll say. But now not only do we need a new entity for that cell, but I would like one that is associated with this darkness, so I decided to gather everyone up, and I was going to send Oscar out into the darkness to see if we could find one of these entities that were supposed to be out there moving around just outside the light. Apparently they will attack us, so I decided to bring about 4 people just in case that were to be true. And a bit of a spoiler alert, it was indeed true, but not exactly how I thought. It was so dark we couldn't see the monster that was attacking us, and we do believe it to be quite small, as it didn't seem to rip Oscar's head off, but merely scratch him. And since every effort to try and capture or even see one was completely futile, I decided to bring everyone back into the light away from these unknown creatures. But even being in their vicinity for a short period of time seemed to give Fugly some type of dark visions that she couldn't break out of. This darkness is interesting indeed, almost like it has its own consciousness or sentience. These creatures that we're warned about could very well be the darkness itself. However, much larger organic creatures known as noctol would end up attacking us sometime later. Allow me to make things a little bit brighter for you here. All we could see from a distance were their yellow glowing eyes moving very rapidly through the darkness. These creatures were like nothing we had ever seen before. They very quickly began running through our defenses, and they even began chasing us back into our containment facility. This would, however, give us ample opportunity to defend ourselves, as it split the monsters into groups of 2. We ended up killing one and we downed another, taking it prisoner. Although studying this big beautiful bastard will have to wait, as we have 2 more outside that need to be slaughtered. I did notice they were trying to stay out of the light as best they could, only coming out of the shadows when they thought they had the opportunity to attack our colonists. This would eventually lead to their defeat during the battle, and we killed one and captured yet another. I immediately noticed something very interesting about these creatures though. They have light exposure, which will actually increase or decrease its seriousness depending on how much light there is in a room. Basically meaning that these creatures are extremely weak in the light. Initially I read this incorrectly, so I turned all the lights off in the rooms, which didn't work out and our colonists were getting attacked by the darkness itself, but then I opted for some dark lights instead, which unfortunately still caused the same amount of light exposure, but I don't know, they look nice, I guess. Now, by this point we had also already generated plenty of bioferrite, which does mean that we can finally begin working on our serum laboratory. I ended up putting it in our workshop for the time being, even though the actual laboratory probably would have been better, but I digress. And now with the proper tools at his disposal, Jasper would finally be able to finish our ghoul resurrection serum. With this vial we can, and we will, and we did, bring Van back to life. Finally reunited once more with one of our original crew members. Now those with the astute eyes among you will probably notice that Van is not currently able to walk, and that is simply because he has a resurrection coma that's currently affecting him. I also noticed that while he was waiting to wake up from the coma, he had a few flesh spike attacks, which, if you remember last episode, kind of concerned me because that's exactly what Fernand had, but thankfully Van ended up recovering from those, although he still could be infected. Even so though, for the time being at least, we were just excited to have our wicked flesh-eating little monster back by our sides once more. And naturally, with Van back, we would of course reinstate our human corpse freezer, but at the moment we don't have any humans, we only have some entity corpses, which Van didn't seem to mind in the least. I mean, he's basically our very own walking meat disposal at this point. Sometime later, we would have more of these noctol beginning to attack us again, and to be honest, we were quite excited about that, as we still had yet another holding cell and they give us advanced research, so don't mind if we do. And we even managed to fend them off quite well, but one of them would end up killing poor little Moonshine. And of course, because of this, we wanted nothing more than revenge, so we would end up killing one of the last remaining 2 alive, and we captured the other. Poor little Moonshine. We would end up burying him next to our solar panels, just in the northern section of the base. I'm sorry I let you down, little buddy. The travesty of Moonshine's death did help me realize that we don't actually have a proper place for our people to worship their gods, so we would actually end up building choosing one for our main religion, but of course it is open to any religion or ideology. Sometime later though, we were once again being attacked by these dark beasts of the shadows. They had once again split into groups of two, with one of them taking itself out on our traps, and the other actually began chasing many of our people through towards the monolith. We would try to gather up in a group so we could take it down in a little firing squad, and this ended up seeming to do the trick. The other two had been at our southern entrance fighting with our turrets. We lost one turret, but it would seem that they took down one of the monsters. The other turret would fall though, unfortunately, and we would have to finish the last monster off all by ourselves. Now by this point, these attacks were becoming a bit too frequent for our liking. That fact, accompanied by the fact that we actually had already filled up the remaining holding cells with these dark beasts for our advanced research, and we decided to build a path of torches over to some of these jagged pillars so that we could begin destroying them and thus ending the darkness. We would immediately begin unleashing a fury of bullets on the first jagged pillar that had fallen, and then we were actually met with some pretty fierce resistance from doing so. The dark beast came out to try and defend it, although we ended up defeating them as well before moving on back to the pillar. With this first pillar down finally, we could begin to see that the darkness was starting to waver. We would end up starting to build a torch path over to the second pillar that had fallen, that way we could make it without being attacked, and immediately begin firing upon it as well. Of course, once again, we were met with some swift resistance, but they weren't too big of a threat, and we took them down relatively easy. Finally finishing the job on this pillar shortly thereafter. Now the last remaining pillar that we knew of in this abyss of eternal darkness was pretty far away, but we would end up trying to build a torch path there nonetheless. It would just take us a little bit longer. However, as we were doing this to try and get there, we actually had the darkness begin wavering on its own. Looks like we've been in it long enough that it's just kind of dissipating. Now don't get me wrong, I'm very happy that we survived through this darkness, this plague that fell upon our land, but I was a little bit sad that we didn't get to destroy the last metallic pillar and try to get whatever technology or resources it had within, as it would appear that it folded within itself and somehow vanished into thin air. We may no longer have any pillars to destroy, but we do have a whole freezer full of these nocturnal dark creatures for Van to snack on. But something else that we have is the mech cluster that still needs to be destroyed because the psychic droner is getting worse and worse as time goes on, and eventually it's going to cause all the ladies in our colony to begin having mental breaks. So I would send several of our colonists in, guns blazing, trying to hide behind this wall here to get the jump on this Inferno cannon. I did realize about halfway through this fight though, if I get close enough to the Inferno cannon, it can't shoot at us. But it will actually explode. I knew this from before, but I tend to be a little bit forgetful, so this became a little bit of an issue later on, unfortunately. Thankfully though, I managed to get my colonist away from the explosions in time for the most part, and eventually we had began taking down the remaining Inferno cannon. The only thing left after that would be the mini slugger turret, which also would fall to our might very quickly. This was obviously much easier said than done, because those Inferno cannons pack quite a punch. Jasper and Akio were lit on fire several times, and we would have to extinguish them and begin tending to their wounds, while Van here started beating the shit out of the psychic droner itself before Fugly finally chipped in. After a bit of elbow grease and some time, we had finally taken down the psychic droner, and no more headaches for the ladies of our colony. The job was done. Ah, just another drop in the bucket of the amount of enemies that have fallen by our hand. Although there was a bit of a complication, Jasper ended up having an infection in his torso. I was quite worried about this, so we ended up using some of the Glitter World medicine that we had in storage, and thankfully his immunity would begin spiking very fast. But while we have some of our people in the makeshift hospital here, I thought maybe we should begin testing them for their imposter gray flesh genome, whatever it was, and basically we started doing that, and none of the three that we tested, even Moon herself, who was our primary doctor, tested positive for this. So unless the doctors are lying, which is indeed a possibility, Jasper, Fugly, and Moon are all clear from having a parasitic metal horror within them as Fernand did, but we still need to test everyone else just in case. In the meantime, I would have Jasper whip up yet another ghoul resurrection serum that we were going to test on the one ghoul that we put next to the hill here after we killed them, and we brought them back to life, of course, as was intended. My idea was to put them into a holding cell and maybe do some tests on them like a lobotomy or something like that to try and make them join us, but I noticed after putting them in their little holding platform, there was no such option. I couldn't give them a bliss lobotomy, I couldn't even dissect this nice heart out of them, I couldn't do anything with them, unfortunately. While there was almost nothing that I could do with them, I could actually put them into a holding cell and research them, so we began expanding our containment facility just a teeny tiny bit with some extra cells. We would then plop the ghoul into their brand new home here and begin getting some basic research out of them, that way we can further our understanding of the basics of the anomaly. Speaking of research and our understanding of these strange creations, we've actually figured out that this sphere is going to basically go insane within 10 days, completely unstable, meaning that it will not be able to be suppressed and is most likely going to activate and attack us. A good way for us to stop this from happening is activating it ourselves on a group of enemies. And since we're playing on Blood and Dust and we haven't had a raid for a little while, I knew if I just kind of kicked back and waited for long enough, we would end up eventually getting some type of threat we could use it on. And so we did, a raid from the Exodus Empire once more. The raid that we got wasn't exactly ideal for using the sphere though, as they were dropping scattered all over the map instead of one big group, but you know, I gotta make do with what I have. I could instantly see how unstable the sphere was. Not only was it attacking the Imperial soldiers, but it was also just attacking some of the wildlife in the area along with the soldiers. Basically anything and everything that it came into contact with, and even things it didn't come into contact with, it would hunt down. Which was fine, except once the Imperials began to flee, it would start hunting down other prey. The prey being our colonist, unfortunately. We immediately tried evacuating the base, running towards the southern entrance and down towards these mountains where we could hide. But I'm afraid Oscar was just a bit too slow, unfortunately. He was immediately obliterated by the massive blast from the sphere, but it didn't stop there, as it would continue trying to chase down the rest of our people as they fled. And it would even successfully catch up with Moon, who is at the tail end of the group, blasting her and Luna to the ground. Having absolutely no empathy, shooting down a mother fleeing with her own child. Moon would begin trying to crawl away as Wise rushed in to grab the baby. Moon was within an inch of her life, lying on the ground hallucinating as she was bleeding out. Thankfully though, Fugly would begin stuffing her wounds with anything she could find to keep her from dying. All Moon cared about though was that her perfect baby Luna was safe in Wise's arms. She didn't care about herself. Truly selfless. Selfless was the act of Oscar as well, keeping the sphere at bay while the others tried to run away. Knowing that he was the slowest in the group and that he would stand no chance against it, sacrificing himself. After striking Moon to the ground, the sphere has disappeared, ending its onslaught. It's unclear whether or not it is gone for good, or if it plans on returning. Only time shall tell. I am quite sad to say that just like at the end of last episode, we will also be ending this episode on a bit of a travesty. The death of Oscar and the almost death of Moon and Luna, but thankfully this little family is safe for now. However, before we go today, we will be respecting our friend Oscar by giving him a proper burial in a beautiful marble sarcophagus right underneath of Fernand's. Truly the least we could do, as he wasn't exactly a founding member, but he was one of the first few members that had joined us. We would end up burying him here and paying our respects to him, but there would be no funeral, for you see, without Oscar, unfortunately, the colony no longer has a main ideology. He was one of the last few remaining members. So, even though we've given him a proper burial, we will not be able to mourn him properly. Though it must be said that no one was more heartbroken about the death of Oscar than his lover, Wise. She lost a lover, a friend, and even her psychic bond with him. Truly devastating. But, my friends, we are now winding down to the complete end of the episode. I want to thank you guys ever so much for watching today's episode. Today's episode has been one that has been filled with fun, or at least in the very beginning, but also towards the end being filled with a lot of loss, unfortunately. But these things happen when you are dabbling with the void and the anomalies that come with the void, as well as all the entities. Of course though, as we've said time and time again, it is not a game, it is not a toy, it's nothing to play with. It is only to be researched and hopefully, maybe, just maybe, harnessed in the very near future. But our mission will drive on. We will continue pushing through. I love you guys ever so much, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.